and more than $500 million of market space to be able to be taken advantage of. What does that mean for you and I? But also when we look at the insurgency across the Great Lakes region, you come from M23 to ADF to FDLR to Mai Mai, and you ask yourself a question: why has peace eluded this region for such a long time? Will the Doha Agreement be able to put a seeming silver lining to it? Let me get to the panel that is supposed to discuss these and more. On my immediate left, Dr. Sarah Virete, the Executive Director for the Center for Constitutional Governance. She's with us this evening. Good evening, Doctor, and it's good to have you.
Thank you, Timothy. Good evening, panelists and viewers out there. It's always good to be on.
How has your week been so far?
It's hectic, but it's good things.
That's good.
We had a good debate in Makerere today on the Philosophy Day, and taking stock of the 1995 Constitution. It was a good space for reflection, but also attempting to find a way forward for constitutionalism in Uganda.
Thank you very much. Making his maiden appearance here, Timothy Chemongez, who is with us this evening, is a legislative and governance expert, is with us this evening making his maiden appearance. Timothy, it's good to meet you, minus seeing ourselves on X.
Thank you so much, Timothy. I'm glad to be here. This is indeed my debut, and I'm looking forward to a very fruitful discussion.
Thank you very much. Dr. Yusuf Serunkuma, a researcher, a scholar, a political analyst. Good evening, Doctor, and it's good to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're well?
Yeah, I think so. I'm hoping we're not here to discuss the Indian Ocean, because it looks like the entire idea behind the topic for today was inspired by our claim to own the Indian Ocean.
We'll pick your 2 cents on that one, but we'll get to it in a short.
It's funny because you say once there is a war, Kenya will have to supply us with many, many things so that we can fight them. And I don't know how that will go, but I hope that's not what we're discussing this evening.
We shall find our way around it and see how to get there. The navigation is mine. Next to Yusuf is David Simba, who is part of a research fellow with MISR at Makerere, but also chairman of the Uganda Matters University Center for African Studies. David, it's good to have you again after a long time.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
The last time you were here, I met a few people who were asking me, how was he so informed about the Congo issues that time? So thank you for abreasting us with such information. Lastly, but not least, it's been a while to have her here. The first Deputy Vice Chancellor of Makerere University, Professor Sarah Sali, is with us this evening. Good evening, Professor, and it's good to have you.
Good evening, Timothy, and good evening, our viewers. I'm also happy to be here. I know Yusuf has talked about the Indian Ocean, but the latest memes are also about the moon, because incidentally, earlier comments were talked about how we all should have a say in space. Probably accessing space will not require as much ammunition as you fear with accessing the Indian Ocean. But I'm happy to be here. Yeah.
We shall not get to the moon. We shall start with the ocean here. But you can follow the conversation. Go to our YouTube channel. Drop your comment there. Let us know what you think. Hashtag UBC Behind the Headlines. Also, we're streaming live on the space. Hashtag UBC Behind the Headlines. For text and WhatsApp, the number is 0709 60 25 92 for both text and WhatsApp. Let's dig into this conversation. But let me give you a bit of context where this came from. Especially looking at that DRC Congo had... Kenya first had the elections in 2022. A lot of mayhem happening there. President Ruto winning by 50.5%. It hasn't been an easy ride. The election cycle will come again in 2027 in Kenya. We drifted to DRC. A lot of insurgency in the northern region there. But also we look at President Tshisekedi winning by about 73%. But a lot of upheavals on how the election happened. We stretched our way back to Tanzania. Recently had elections. The President Samia Suluhu winning by 98%, but the internet was off. A lot of unrest in the country. What will that mean? We also look at the elections that are happening here come January of next year, the impact they'll have on the region, both economically and politically, but also the social strata of the people. We've seen a lot of refugees coming into the country, and we'll also be touching especially the Doha Agreement with the M23. Does that mean stability and prosperity of the region? This and more. These are 10 countries that we're talking about. They occupy about 25% of the freshwater bodies. We're talking about lakes from Lake Victoria, Tanganyika, Kivu, Malawi, and Tanganyika there, just to mention but a few. And most of these countries, about 7 of them, still have insurgencies, indirectly or directly. Let's get to the panel. I was thinking of who to start with, but Professor told me, let me start from this side, going the other side. Dr. Sarah, and I would like to start with the politics within the region. When you look at these 10 countries, we have summits year in, year out. These summits started in 2006. This body began to meet. They actually recently, I think last year, met over DRC here in Uganda, earlier on this year or late last year, and that happened. When you look at us and our electoral processes, especially those 4 countries I've mentioned, with us in line to get off the blocks, what do you make of it?
Well, first of all, looking at the politics, it's a mix of, the political scorecard. When you look at Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, DRC, Rwanda, Burundi, you have a mixture of rising authoritarian regimes in the region. You have the hybrid regime in Rwanda. You have a bit of progressive democracy in Kenya. And now we have the latest decline on the block being Tanzania, which was formerly known as a safe haven for peace. It's now a slaughter for Gen Zs, with a death estimated at 3,000 emerging from the last election, and the developments of SADC, setting up the Commission of Inquiry, having even rejected to congratulate Mama Samia, led by the former president of Malawi, Chakwera, but also Tanzania setting up its own commission. And you don't know which is which, whether the regime killing people can again investigate itself or wait for the SADC Commission to establish what happened. We also hear the International Criminal Court is waiting around Kenya and monitoring the Tanzania situation. So those are not, good prospects for prosperity, like our topic says, in terms of political risk. When you go slightly in the north, you have South Sudan with a perennial chaotic situation, failure to hold elections with 4 postponements. You have the recent firing of a would-be successor of Salva Kiir, or favored successor, and contradictions surrounding that. The first vice president, Riek Machar, is in prison, facing treason charges. But also when you come to Uganda, the leader of opposition, Dr. Besigye, has spent 1 year in prison over treason, same charges. Tundu Lissu has been in prison over treason. And the Tundu Lissu case is the only case I've heard of an individual being charged with treason, with nobody that had conspired or allegedly conspired with him. Just 1 person charged with the attempts to overthrow a legitimate government, single-handedly, Tundu Lissu's case. He represented himself and won, but stayed in prison because of the context in Tanzania. So you have this situation that does not give a promise for the prosperity that the Great Lakes region, or the potential prosperity that the region harbors. In Kenya, on the other hand, they are experiencing what I would call negative peace. A lot of progress in terms of democratic dispensation. When you observe elections in Kenya, you feel good that you have observed a normal election closer home. Because I think it's the only election we can think meets, to some extent, the basic minimum in the East African region in terms of political freedoms, in terms of transparency, with the challenges, but better than the other countries. Recently, it has come under protests by Gen Zs, demanding for greater transparency and accountability, almost collapsing, bringing Ruto's regime to its knees in 2 years, and Ruto was forced to form alliance with the ODM in order to maintain momentum and legitimacy of some sort. But also with the passing of Raila, then that alliance is developing cracks if you go by the recent anniversary celebrations of the ODM. So when you come to the Rwanda, on the other hand, a hybrid regime, limited freedoms, a bit of progress, and then the threat for peace in the region. DRC as a hub for rebels, for instability, harboring the ex-FAR Interahamwe, the ISIS branch, the ADF, 133 plus militias, and the conflict that divided the country recently, M23 taking part of the Eastern DRC, and Felix Tshisekedi, on the other hand, staying with one half of the country, attempts to convict the former president, which also threatened the bit of stability that would have emerged in DRC. You have the failure of the ESC peacekeeping mission in the DRC. And sometimes when you want to discuss progress of the potential 500 million population, we need to first sort out these challenges and create a conducive environment for development.
Thank you. Timothy, let me come to you. What you really watch these areas, especially on the governance area. When you look at the 4 countries or the whole Great Lakes region, what undertones do you see? What currents do you see? And even as they lead towards our elections here, what is your feeling about it?
I think that the observation by Sarah fairly correct, that there is an increased and a very deliberate increase of authoritarianism in the respective countries, but also that contributed largely by, by the increased levels of impunity. But from my assessment is that there seems to be a very positive direction as far as the citizens demand to be involved in this process, especially by the so-called Gen Zs. I think that increasingly you see that how they want to be governed, how they want to be involved in the governance of the country seems to be more outgoing, in comparison to the previous generations. And so when you look at all these countries, of course including Uganda, you see that there's a sense in which the establishment as designed are created in a way to entrench that sort of governance in these respective countries, which in many ways the biggest component in crisis, is the democracy, but also what is enshrined in the respective legal frameworks. It is true that when you look at, for example, Kenya, they've made some significant progress in terms of their democratic adherence to the basic principles of rule of law and democracy. And to that end, there's also been some deliberate effort to ensure that despite the fact that you may have leaders that may be overzealous in nature, or may be interested in ensuring that they protect what they have worked for, as seeing what we are calling here the protecting of the gains. You see that there is a threshold to which the country has made progress. Uganda, on the other hand, compared to our colleagues in South Sudan and the rest of the colleagues in the Great Lakes region, you notice that there's still quite a lot that is desired, at least to the extent of ensuring that the citizens' agency is realized in how the governance of these respective countries is conducted. Of course, Tanzania comes out very peculiar, especially that very few of us, or many of us, didn't expect what happened there, which is a very good sign again, because at the end of the day, democracy is refined through how its citizens are involved or even demand better to the governance of their countries. And to the extent that the Tanzanians are pushing to to refine their democratic process. It is a positive. We've seen the same again, probably at a very small percentages in Uganda, where you see that the citizens seems to be actively involved, and they are demanding for better. And if you assess, see what's happening in Kenya, see what's happening in Tanzania, for the rest of the region, probably it's a matter of time. And it is upon us to see ourselves not getting to where our colleagues have reached, where we are seeing loss of lives, loss of property, and this greatly compromises the development, but also, you know, the question of how the country is governed. Once that happens, for example, Tanzania, I think they have, you know, moved past a certain stage now, and it's upon the framework in that country to ensure they can get better in addressing the issues that the citizens are raising, but also ensuring that the component of citizens' agency is protected, but also respected, to ensure that that sort of system is protected. But also, more importantly, I think that across the region, democracy is greatly threatened, partly due to so many reasons. And
what do you mean by that?
Probably across the world, yeah, I think that could be
let's stick to the region. When you go with Yusuf, you'll take a tangent that you won't come back. But when you look, when you say it is threatened, what do you mean by it's threatened?
It's largely to the extent that there is deliberate move, or there is deliberate action to frustrate the question of good governance, the question of citizens' involvement in how they are governed, in how the voices of the people reflect in the governance question of their countries. And that you see across the country, that there seems, because of the growth and the clear approach in which the status quo or the leadership framework in these respective countries are working deliberately to ensure that, you know, the interest of the elite is protected, and that of the, you know, of the general public takes the secondary stage.
Yusuf, let me come to you, and thank you, Timothy, for that. When you look at what has been happening, especially in the region, the political tensions within this region, to what extent has the historical connotations around it versus the contemporary governance challenges that it has played into what we are doing right now?
I'm trying to see if I understood your question really well.
So the historical context of the region, and we're speaking about, let's talk about Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi. How much of the historical context has caused the political tension, or even further bringing the contemporary governance challenges we're having?
By that, do you mean the legacy of colonialism?
Pick it up from wherever you feel you can pick it up from.
No, Mamdani has a student here. You'll have to ask him that. He's the man of the legacy of colonial. He has the legacy of colonialism theory. Mamdani has disciples. I'm a student, but not his disciple. So there's a disciple here. I think you'll be the next person to answer that. But I want to say this, Timothy. One of the things that bothers me is that we discuss governance, but we tend to reduce it to a form of governance, democracy. It's one of the forms, right? And I think listening to Sarah and Timothy here, you know, what they described contained to a region, I just felt we were discussing the global condition, right? And I have written in some of my work that, you know, Palestine and Israel has really thrown the African intelligentsia in some sort of a quagmire. Because the things around which we imagine our futures, things like democracy, human rights, sovereignty, are all in shambles. They don't make sense and more. If we took the examples of Western Europe as sort of the gold standard for measuring respect for human rights, for measuring respect for international law, things such as sovereignty, you realize they don't make sense in Ukraine, in Palestine. And our heroes, sort of our icons of the ideals of democracy, are the ones stepping on them, right? They've been at the forefront of stepping on. So we are lacking a locus. How do we now think about human rights? How do we think about, elections, for example? Hamas, which is classified as a terrorist organization, was voted overwhelmingly by majority of Palestinians, but it's classified as a terrorist organization. You see, so I worry that, our locus, the tools with which we imagine our futures, are difficult to think through nowadays, to work with nowadays, because we don't have an example. When Timothy said the region, democracy in the region is being threatened, he didn't say by who, but also I just quipped that this is the condition across the world. There's a threat to the ideal. We find it sort of incongruent with how we want society to be managed, right? The easiest example is that the countries where we ship our girls every day, 700 girls every day, never hold elections. They don't even democracy is not a word they use in describing their governance question. But we're shipping our women, young women, to those countries every single day to look for a good life, right? So if we talk about a good life in this country, in the terminology that we use to discuss it is democracy, I think we're doing a disservice to ourselves, right? And the key yardstick of measuring democracy is normally electoral processes. They are also insufficient in understanding our sort of difficult situation as people who live in this space. We organize elections on the African continent not because they matter to the people who go to the vote, but because our leaders organize these elections for legitimacy, so that they can borrow in our name, so they can go get credit in our name, World Bank. So World Bank can only lend to them, or the international lenders can only lend to them if they have the mandate of the people. This is why even through a condition such as COVID-19, we still had to go through an election. You look at a country such as Libya, which should be looking for stability. They also forced to go through an election. Look at Central African Republic. There's almost no government. Somalia, they forced these countries to go into elections. Not because the elections matter to the wananchi in those countries, but because elections matter to those who give us money, right? I'll give an interesting example. We talk about South Sudan. There's a case which really fascinated me not too long ago, that global corporations from the UK and in the United States, 4 weeks after South Sudan was formed, flew on private jets with cash to bribe South Sudanese officials. And they said, this is their language, to profit from violence. They wanted to sort of, wreck already negotiated contracts, tear them apart, so they can turn the different groups against each other, right? So this is South Sudan, the South Sudan we have now. So this case was adjudicated in 2021, and Glencore PLC pleaded guilty to trying to mess up South Sudan. So if you look at the South Sudan's condition now, you can't, downplay the role of international actors, right? And I think this brings us to our continent. That, I think about, our countries, I hope I'm not going on for too long. I think there's a struggle for the soul of this region. And I think we narrow our lenses when we discuss governance just through the ideas of democracy. We need, I think, to broaden our lenses. Because you see, if you look across the region, in all those countries, most of them, the so-called opposition leaders are in jail. The Vice President of Sudan, the opposition leader in Tanzania, I was here. They're in jail. So it's not writhing authoritarianism in my view. It's a condition gambling with a thing which is not true to our core. Gambling with sort of democracy. Look at us now, Timothy. Look at us now. We're going through a facade of an election. And my friend here, Sarah, is trying to lobby to observe it. But there's nothing to observe. It's a circus, right? We're going through a thing, and as soon as Museveni is declared winner, we will say there was an election. And then we'll discuss the pros and cons. Did it meet the threshold? Did it not meet? You're not observing it? But at the end of the day, once Museveni is declared winner, the international community will be like, congrats, Mr. President. But all of us here agree what we're witnessing is a circus.
You said it is not in our core. What is our core?
Our core is the question of governance, right? The question of governance. Before we entered democracy equals prosperity in the 1980s, we were governed differently. And you look elsewhere, the core of, if the idea is to grow the people. Look at Libya before Muammar Gaddafi was overthrown. All the indices of growth, Libya was on top, way higher than South Africa. They didn't organize elections. They didn't even use terms such as democracy. All they spoke about was governance. We want prosperity for women and children, water, access to fuel, turning the desert into a green space. This is governance. Governance, so what we're struggling with is how do we turn this space we have, the richest continent in the world, into a thing that benefits us. So the international actors, they push democracy equals prosperity because it enables them to come here with the big money and buy us out. Where they can't buy us out, they make sure there's violence, such as in Sudan. Right? So our core, what we're looking for as our core is prosperity, access to water, to food, good education, fuel is affordable, good infrastructure. This is what we want. But the problem we tend to argue that to get all those, you have to have democracy. But look where we send our girls. Look at Iran, look at Russia, look at all those places. They don't speak language, but these are the envies of the world.
Before I come to David, you seem to advocate for socialism in a capitalistic state. Is that what you're insinuating?
Well, you didn't know Mamdani just won an election in New York and is a democratic socialist. What he actually did effectively, he liberated the claim of socialism, right? But I'm giving you, because
you're saying infrastructure, water, all these basic needs that anyone needs to be at the forefront, and not the governance or democracy there. So are you advocating for socialism versus the capitalism that is within this region?
Okay, if you use the terminologies, you make it look very ugly, right? But let's work with the examples I've given you. That we send 700 girls every day to the Middle East because those countries are prosperous, right? And I'm telling you, when they talk about their governance, they don't use the language of rights. They don't use the right to protect. They don't use the language of democracy. They use how do we transform our resources into benefit for all of us. You can call it socialism, you can call it nationalism, you can use any terminology you want. But I think it's high time we started thinking about governance as, exploiting our natural resources to our benefit. The merchandisers of democracy, who have zero respect for electoral democracies, by the way, as you can see what's happening in Venezuela right now, all they're interested in is how do they access what we have as a continent. That's all that matters to them. How? The government which is in office, Boris Johnson said to us very famously in his book that there's an archaic man in Uganda, but we still need him for the things he's doing for us in the region. You see, they describe our president, our many times elected president, as archaic, but we still need him. So which means they said, we still want him to be president of this country because, he benefits us in the region. He sends mercenaries to where we want to exploit. He takes all the people we don't want. He takes aliens we don't want. We're the poorest country. We host the biggest number of refugees. Even rich countries are sending them to us. You see, and we say we are very hospitable. But the entire idea is that, this man does what we don't like. Especially in taking refugees. We don't want them to come to Europe. Also, we want access to Africa. This man is enabling us to have it. So even if he goes through a sham election, even if he kills 53 people on the streets of Kampala, we will say, Congrats, Mr. President, for the next time, because of the work he does for them, not because he benefits his people.
Thank you. Let me come to you, David. And even when I was thinking about what angle to come at you there, especially, let's start from M23. This Doha agreement, there have been so many agreements to be able to bring peace into DRC as one of the countries in the Great Lakes region. What makes this different from the ones that have been there before?
Let's stick with what Yusuf has thrown in for a short while, because I want to give a qualifier to what Yusuf has said, and this is not by any means to disagree with the line of argument you just put, but I think we need to get a qualifier here. Lest we we run with a critique that is skewed. What's the animal in the room here? So even when in full agreement with what Yusufa said, that we will need to talk about governance and the things that matter for what is governance, we will still need, there will still be debate. So that governance will not be someone filled with wisdom to dictate that which will be needed or to the rest. So there will always be a debate. And the fact that there will be a debate and there will be multiple voices that will have to coalesce and get another opinion is the realm of democracy. Now, the thing which Yusuf has been beautifully painting to us is the particular animal. You see, we are struggling with a particular script of the liberal democracy. So that adjective is not benign, innocent, or even gratuitous. So what is the liberal democracy? And that is the thing which you should understand, because it is not democracy the problem. It's not even democracy the form, as Yusuf would want us to believe. What I think is, look, by the time Claude Ake is writing The Feasibility of Democracy in 1996, he says, not even Athenians practice this thing over the post-Cold War Washington consensus. So there is a different animal altogether that has been curated in the vocabulary of pre-modern ancient Greece called democracy that has been sold to us. And we are all drunken and we are in the total hangover. There are two different things, democracy and liberal democracy. What is this liberal democracy? In a nutshell, I would say, you have now this particular belief that universal adult suffrage is the vehicle par excellence to deliver good governance. And what is good governance? That thing that limits government's responsibilities and duties and load them onto Adam Smith's famous invisible hand, which is very much visible in its degrees of causing violence and very visible in as far as the free market is concerned. That is the nature of the governance we have. And if we collapse democracy for liberal democracy and we take the promise that good governance in the language of, World Bank and IMF crafted this good governance, which is very funny because it's really it is the flip side of government. The Americans speak about a good government is what they stand for. They have sold to the rest of the whole world good governance. And they have emptied government from good governance. And it's very ironical. So we are struggling with a script that reordered the world, particularly in this world that has been led by the British Euro-American hegemony, and it's coming. It has run its course. What is very fortunate is that the ink is drying. The ink that has been spelling out that script is drying, and I'm saying it's drying with a whole modicum of an abundance of care, because we are now having a fairly increasingly multipolar world that more than half of the world has just kind of remove all the clothing of the liberal democracy, whether you call it the BRICS or just the global South. The post-World War II American hegemonic scripture of giving them the liberal democracy. And the twin to the liberal democracy is liberal peace, which we are going to talk about this, if you want to understand, from Lusaka to Doha, where Congo has been thrown into liberal peace. There is a very, not just a nuance, there's a very important distinction between what do we have in mind when we say peace and what do we get in these deals from Mobutu must go. We go to Lusaka, Kabila comes, Kabila must go, Joseph comes here, Kabila must go, Joseph, we have Tshisekedi. And the liberal peace, it's this whole idea of emptying the political. You empty the political, you empty the realm of choice making, and you throw everything to the highly technicized and depoliticized process of fixing.
You bring an interesting notion of liberal democracy, liberal peace, and talk about an invisible hand that seems to be very evident in what it's touching and what it's doing. Is this invisible hand behind this Doha agreement? And we have discussed DRC before here. Is this the true peace that will come to DRC, especially, this will be liberal peace?
Oh, man, I can tell you, Timothy, that we are in again for another episode of a joke. Look, Doha agreement calls itself the framework for a comprehensive peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda. Now, it's very interesting that we used to have it as a M23/AFC. Now it is AFC/M23. That's another story. But it has 8 protocols. There are 8 protocols that together they will constitute what we call the Doha agreement. Let me spare you the other 3. Let me speak to the 5th and the 8th. The 5th protocol, which is yet to be signed, only 2 protocols have been signed so far. We have gotten the Liberation of Prisoners Protocol, yes, that was signed on the 14th of September. Then there is the mechanism and the verification for ceasefire, the ceasefire mechanism and verification, which was signed on the 14th of October. What struck me in this, and it is all spelled out in this grand draft, but the protocol needs to be worked out. There is a 5th protocol which is titled the Interim Security Arrangements of DDR, the demobilization, disarmament, demobilization, reintegration of local armed forces, and neutralization of foreign armed groups. That is the elephant in the room. I can tell you from Lusaka through Pretoria, Lusaka Accord 1999, Pretoria Accord 2003, Addis Ababa Accord 2013, through Luanda, which was watched in December 14, 2024, to Nairobi, which was a stillbirth, now to Doha and Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. on 27th of July, now Doha on 15th of this month, of November. I can tell you, the language of arrangement for DDR, for local, what do they have in that local? It is a catchword for anything of Mai Mai, Wazalendu, and that whole conglomeration of the rebel groups there. They're about 48, according to John Stier's the Congo Group research. It is supposed to be midway through a DDR. When it comes to foreign troops, what do they have there? And good enough, they've spelled it out in that accord. It is FDLR. The language of neutralization is 5 times cited in the Washington, D.C. Framework Agreement. Neutralization of FDLR. They are destined to be neutralized. Neutralized means they are supposed to be flushed out. This is what the president here keeps on saying. You have to flush out. ADF candidate will be flushed out. LRA will be flushed out then. FDLR, they have to be flushed out. Those are to be flushed out. The others are to be DDR. That clause, whenever that protocol will be signed, will be a replay of Amendment 23 scenario of November 2022. I can tell you without fear of contradiction.
Very interesting. So you almost sound like there was a stillbirth, then died on arrival. This one, what will happen to it?
No, I mean, it is a historical. It is struck by historical amnesia. Doha is struck by amnesia. We have gotten, and this is the tragedy of the Congo's Eastern Congo's violence. Actually, there is an entire repertoire. There's a whole repertoire of lesson learning, but they take stock, but they don't take lessons. And I mean, someone said that it is insanity to expect different results to do the same thing.
Before I get to Professor, you mentioned FDLR as the only foreign addressed in that 5th protocol there?
The 5th protocol talks about the foreign armed forces, and it says this. It says foreign, it doesn't name it, but it says this in the clause, in the preamble. When you read the preamble, the 5th paragraph in the preamble, and says that the spirit of this Doha agreement will have to be read to the letter of the Washington, D.C. agreement, which has got an FDLR mentioned 5 times. So the guess is as good as mine.
What happens to the other foreign forces that are there?
Do you still want to know what happened to the other foreign? The foreign has been named. The foreign is one particular thing. Any other thing is now called the local armed group. The foreign is named.
Let me come to Professor. Professor, when you look at the thread from Kenya to DRC to Tanzania to us, there's a thread of young people rising up. What is the contestation there? What are they asking for when you read through and see the thread of what's happening there? And will it be the same fate here?
Thank you very much, Timothy, and members. And I think the people before me have debated very well. What is the thread across all this? First of all, I want to comment on what Yusuf and David have said. Yeah, so I think they are both in a way correct, that we are operating a system which has been fairly imposed on us. I mean, ever since we were colonized, there's the colonial legacy of all these things. So we try to fit within what is globally acceptable as a form of governance. And of course, that colonialism and what it arrested in terms of governance here is that it never gave an opportunity for these societies to emerge in what would be suitable for them. So ever since colonialism, they have to emerge and progress according to the standards set for them by other people. So it's true, the kind of democracy we are speaking about is a particular kind of democracy, which is a Western-style kind of democracy, and in Uganda it tends to be analyzed largely with the activities around the election period. What happens beyond that is never usually counted. But also what I've seen is a lot of what is being discussed around democracy in these countries relates to the elections, but also it relates to the character of the leadership of the country and who is at the top, and largely it's around the presidency. We are not paying attention to what else is happening in the electoral period, if we are to stick with that period. Because while the top, we can easily conclude, we can easily analyze, because the media is actually forcing us to focus on that. If you look at what is happening at the other levels, actually there's a lot of contestations around democracy. Not just around democracy, around the process. So it's not as captured as what people may be portraying about the top. If you look at what's happening, people are very vigilant about who should go through as an MP, who should go through as a councillor, who should go. They are really scrutinizing the voters' rolls. Right now, we've been even told if you're found using money, if you are, all the things we have been discussing about, the overuse of money, the fundraisings, and all of that. So there's a lot of vigilance, there's a lot of policing, there's a lot, so you can see a lot of civic engagement. And it makes me wonder whether it's not high time we brought back Kushijian's understanding of democracy as a discussion, which was very popular in the late 90s and early 2000s. Because Julia, in her writings then, in her handbooks, she really argues about democracy is not just what happens at the state level, but all the civic engagements that people participate in. So when you're at a local level, even in this electoral process, people are talking about access to services, things which concern them, the roads, the churches, the lack of infrastructure, the healthcare services, the state of the school, the issue of security and peace. So actually at local level that is really happening, and that actually is shaping who they think should get in or shouldn't get in. At the top level, things may be a little bit different, but actually democracy as a way of people being empowered to have a conversation on what concerns them is happening at the lower levels. Maybe the question could be, what would be the difference if we really intentionally compared the top and the other levels? But even then...
Professor, the top makes the decisions. The bottom line you're talking about really just is implementation?
No, implementation is the easy. Me, I'm talking about the character of the people. You cannot actually say that it is just a facade at that level. While it only occurs every 5 years, those 5 years, actually, people are empowered in deciding who should get in and who should not get in. If you are operating at those levels, the conversations are actually scary because the people will actually tell the people they want to take out, except if you are going to intimidate them. But the people are very particular about what they want. So they are not as disempowered as we may want to portray. It's not really a facade. There's something taking place there. And until I got involved, I was really actually shocked because we thought, yeah, you see what's happening, and this is, it's actually not that. People are very particular. People are very interested. People, and why? Because that's the only sector which has grown over the years. It's the politicking, okay? And the politics, and looking to politics as a way of transforming lives. So there's a lot of attention about that. Not very much, oh, we have an agriculture extension officer, you haven't come to our farms, so what should be? So everyone thinks the politics should be the thing that transforms them. So at local level, there's a lot of interest there because people believe at the lower levels they can do something about it. Just hold on, Yusuf. Yeah.
Circuses are very interesting things.
So you think what's happening at local level is a circus?
It's very interesting to. Have you ever attended the circus? It's very exciting. There's so much energy, so much investment in terms of money. You seek to befriend the owner of the property who is renting all the other into the circus. It's very exciting if you go to a circus. So I would want to assume that what you're describing is the interest we get from a circus.
No, I wouldn't think so. Yeah. I think people have the capacity to make change, and that's why they vote in people and vote out others. So it's not like someone just dictating who comes through the ballot box or not. People are very energized. I think you pay attention to that level. But you asked a question on what is happening if we draw a thread around the Gen Zs.
Yes, the agitation of the
young agitation. Yeah, the younger people. Now, as for the local people who are looking at service delivery and roads and infrastructure, I think they haven't checked. Every population demographic also has its interests. The younger people are looking for what is in for them with all these things that are taking place. They are unemployed, and they don't see any opportunities with regard to that. Of course, some analysts say we have undertaken a lot of elite production in that we have had a lot of growth, but jobless growth. It is the kind of economic growth which is not creating jobs, it's not creating opportunities for the people. And the little things they could do are heavily taxed, okay? But also these younger people know better, and they are interested in getting better. They are connected globally, so you're not going to assume they don't know and you're going to dictate for them. These are guys who can go online and they know what is better. They desire other forms of democracy as they're seeing them in other areas. So you're not going to tell them, oh, well, that is Western, and for us here, this is ours, and that's particular. If that's what they want, and they can organize for it, they can organize. So what we are seeing is a demographic which also has its own interests. And from where they stand, they don't see much hope in what is happening. And of course, they are going to raise questions on the cleanliness of and the transparency around the political process. And if they think something has not gone right, they are going to challenge it. They are going to organize in numbers because they are unemployed, so they can actually organize, and they will organize and they will take you on. It doesn't matter whether 3,000 died somewhere, another group actually will also organize. So I don't think it is anything to shock us. It is a demographic transition we are going through. And until we get the resources, just look at the numbers that graduate per year from our universities, more than 10,000. How many jobs are created in this country per year? According to the labor market surveys, we are told 700 jobs per year, most in the private sector. And if they're in the private sector, they are not subject to the rigor that we would have in the government sector. You must follow this, you must advertise. People are free to create their jobs and find who they employ there because they are private enterprise. So where are the rest of the people going? And you're not going to tell them not to dream to be better. They know what they want, and they know what they desire. So this region has younger people. A country like Uganda has one of the youngest populations and the fastest growing population rate. So you're going to continue seeing some of these upheavals until our countries economically get at a level where they think they can provide for the people.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sarah, let me come to you. Yusuf mentioned something about legitimacy, and you have observed elections, especially in the African continent. But when you look at the Great Lakes region, does it validate what he's saying, that legitimacy is the means to the end of these elections for them to get into power, and where does this leave the people?
Well, I think we first to distinguish between what is illegal and legitimate. If I may use the example of Tanzania, President Samia can claim to be illegally elected the president of Tanzania, but she is illegitimate because of what transpired during that process. You disqualify all your opponents, stage manage people to run with you, essentially or literally contesting against yourself. On the day of voting, genuine turn-up did not go beyond 30%. But she gets a result claiming 30 million people voted, and everybody's like, how did they vote when bullets were flying over people's heads? So she's illegal, legal in office, but she's illegitimate. So Yusuf brings in the aspect of whether this liberal democracy is working for us or not. And he was drawing parallels with the Middle East, most of the countries which are monarchies. Some absolute monarchies, others constitutional monarchies. But if you look at Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Abu Dhabi, they are monarchies. Monarchies that run a concept of social harmony, if I may borrow from the term from Singapore, of making sure the people have quality social services of education, housing, healthcare, and sanitation. Like in the United Arab Emirates, the indigenous citizens, who are estimated at about 150,000, they don't need to work. There's a flat before you go to the high end of Palm Jumeirah, where they have government houses, very posh apartments, and everything is provided for, paid by government, plus allowances. So whether they get out to work or not is their choice. And then you have the other people who live in the United Arab Emirates, mainly foreigners, but with citizenship and a good tax climate. The same principle that Singapore used to develop and attract foreign investment. The same principle that United Arab Emirates is using. And with, of course, the oil resource, which is the major resource. So if you compare the United Arab Emirates with Uganda, because the United Arab Emirates also celebrated 50 years, I think they're about 55 years now, or so, 53. So if you compare the United Arab Emirates with Uganda, the only reason we are in the state we are in is leadership. In my view, you had a former complete desert. If you look at the days of Idi Amin when he was sending donations to the UAE, they had nothing until when they discovered oil. And the game changer is leadership with a different approach that works for the people. So we can say that democracy here is not working. Singapore is using the same principle of democracy. But why is it working for Singapore? Why are they not claiming that democracy is bad? Because Singapore uses the same approach that the UAE is using for the people. I think, for me, it's more about leadership than what system we are using currently. We used to be under kingdoms, pre-colonial era. The setup we had, the setup in the kingdoms had a structure that you could compare easily with the doctrine of separation of powers. There's a council of elders, there's a court, I think the difference is really a breakdown of morals, basic moral decency in our leadership, in my view. If we had values, basic moral decency, and a leadership with ability to serve the people, whichever system people choose can work for them, in my view.
But, Doctor, when you look at these 4 countries we're talking about, and you look at the young people there, and you look at democracy in there, you look at the agitation of the young people, agitating for what Professor says, jobs, infrastructure, the social strata that they want in there. Is leadership still a question across those countries?
Why are we looking at young people as a problem? When you look at advantages, when you look at triggers for development, ideally, young people are looked at as a resource that would be very vital in fast-tracking the digital economy, fast-tracking entrepreneurship skills. Why do we view young people as a problem? The problem is the leadership that is not planning for the young people. Young people are not the problem. Highly skilled, most of them tech savvy. It's a big resource that must be harvested by good leadership in their countries. Africa's population is 60% young people. About 3 weeks ago, we were at the Tana Forum in Addis, the think tank for the African Union, with current presidents, former presidents, and a bit of technocrats and experts. And if I may borrow the words of President Kisano, he did mention that any leader who looks at young people as a risk is a wrong leader, is not fit for leadership. Highly educated. It's the most educated generation we have in the continent. Highly skilled. Why don't we harvest that potential by creating opportunities for young people? Why do we look at them as risks when they demand for transparent and accountable leadership? Why should that be a problem? Why are we not promoting transparent and accountable leadership? For example, the case of Kenya. When the Tanzanians on the streets demanding for free and fair elections, why should we look at that as a problem? Isn't that what we stand for? Isn't that what is written in our constitutions? If it's a problem, then let's delete it from our constitutions. Young people demanding for their rights is a very legitimate cause. Demanding for their space, demanding for opportunities, and the leaders must create this and serve them or quit.
Thank you. Timothy, let me come to you. And let's stick to these young people a bit. Where is the mismatch between the young people and the people governing them? Where are we losing it in translation?
I think that there seems to be a generalized approach in how societies are governed. Recognizing that, young people have access to information. As indicated, they seem to be more, the access to digital and also tech-savvy advantage that young people have. The concept of us now living in a global, in literally a global village, where you have young people literally getting to understand what is happening within the region, and what you would otherwise call the question of benchmarking, to understand what's happening. So you would imagine that an average young person in South Sudan who has accessed information in what's happening in the region knows what is good for them, knows what others have, and knows that this is due for us, and that if we pushed a bit harder, we're able to get what we deserved, or what is ours. And so I think that compared to the previous generations, where access to information, sometimes the levels of accommodation of authoritarian mechanism, the system today gives the younger people an advantage, and that's across the world. The concept around how leaders deal with this, what again should be encouraged as opportunities, is greatly affected by the threat to the status quo. Because what it means is that having sometimes informed citizens can greatly interfere with leadership that is interested in, you know, protecting what is theirs, or some of the fishy approaches, some of the other concept around the society that does not favor the people. And once the people, especially now that the young people have actually demonstrated that they're able to, they understand, they know, and they can go for it, I think that it is around the thinking. It is around the general application of how governance looks like in the previous times vis-a-vis what's happening today. If you see, for example, Tanzania, which has largely been, you know, viewed as a harmonious society, that in fact I was there some time back, and part of the joke that goes on there is that, you know, a police officer wants to arrest you, and you literally, you know, request to arrest you. A concept that is borrowed largely, you know, from the socialism perspective. And to that, where the young people have taken the country, of course it's on another level now, but also it demonstrates that the awareness is increasing, but also more importantly, the aspects and how governance is viewed and practiced within the region, but also globally, must be rethought. Because again, the reflection of the leadership is in its people. And that we've seen across the world, in Venezuela, in East Africa here, that young people seem to understand what is due for them, and that there are mechanisms for which they can push and have their way. Lastly, I think for me it's around, maybe if I could weigh on the question of governance, maybe the different models. You know, the worry is if you choose to adopt the democratic approach and move to exercise a hybrid mechanism, or where you want to, you know, rule under the democratic system, but also have advantages of liberal democracy and all these other sort of systems. So it's because where we find ourselves, it's a crisis of leadership. It's a crisis of the ability to have leaders who can think through. And today, one of the biggest risks is the ability or the threat to allow people think through. Today, we literally have a bigger percentage of people whose ability to think has been greatly hampered, and that undermines how the question of governance looks like. And that has given the leadership the leeway to do whatever they want. And so I think that irrespective of whatever model a country chooses to take, and that is agreed, if you have proper governance structure, proper governance systems clearly adhered to what has been agreed, and proper accountability systems, there will definitely be a prosperity.
Very, very interesting that you say governance systems, but I'll come back to that in a bit. Let me read some messages here. Good evening, Timothy. Dr. Serunkuma tends to say the meaningful people-centered development and democracy are mutually exclusive. There are many countries in the world that enjoy both. On this continent, I can give examples of Botswana, Namibia, etc., but also I can extend as far as Ghana. We need a system that gives the people the right to change anti-people leadership with free and fair elections. Even if we elect someone who is into the bad people, at least we are able to count down the dailies until the term ends. No prosperity without stability. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the show. My name is Joshua Onyango from Busia, and I'm watching. Okay, thank you, Joshua. Someone writes something lengthy. Good evening, Timothy. The countries in the Great Lakes region have become personal businesses and empires for politicians. And this started way back. The reason why Europeans have managed to have stability is because there is a clear distinction between business and leadership. For example, in Uganda, making policies is basic business, and you pay MPs for their ideas, and you force the citizens to listen to them. Whatever the nation does, it affects it, and no one cares. How do we develop to be stable and compete in a global world other than having proper leadership that is not of dealers? This is Bua. Thank you, Bua. One more before we take a break. The political situation in Africa and the Great Lakes is very complex. The currently quite volatile, and the region needs to unlock her potential, which requires a unified approach that turns the region's natural advantages, that is to mention minerals, agriculture, logistics, human capital, into engines that shall prosper it. Peace is the foundation of market growth. This is Opolot Ignatius Akoth from Entebbe. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll wrap up the beginning of the stories here in the Great Lakes region, and we'll dig further into the other stories there. This and more after this break.
Ugandans! The unstoppable internet deal of deals is here with MTN WakaNet Fiber. Connect your home with our starter pack of 100 Mbps at only 99K. And if you want more speed for less, we've got you. Get the 200 Mbps at only 129K. And the fastest one yet? Enjoy up to 500 Mbps at only 250K. To sign up, use the My MTN app or dial *100 *23 hash. Offer is valid till the 30th of November for both new and existing subscribers. Together, our connection is unstoppable.
The government's core mandate is to maintain law and order, safeguard citizens' rights, and provide essential public services.
Remember, one of the pillars of the roadmap is innovation and entrepreneurship.
There has been this question of how are you protecting our indigenous seed?
It's going to be a tall project that answers somebody's question.
The Front Bench has brought you insightful discussions on governance, security, healthcare, justice, and commerce.
Why do you go through this complicated procedure, involve the lawyers? You bring the case against him, the judge will hear you out and pass judgment, and you're out of court in record time.
We remain committed to keeping you informed and engaged on key national matters.
So these are huge, these are powerful organizations which now Uganda chairs. Why don't you come together?
If we haven't migrated to the e-card because of various reasons, including that not all the people of Uganda have smartphones.
You can sit in your house, apply for a passport.
If you have a Ugandan who has a successful logistics firm in the US, it means he can come to Uganda and do a lot more.
Every Monday at 8:30 p.m. with me, Jethro Kasaiji, your interface with the government only on your public broadcaster, UBC, Inspiring Uganda.
In a nation hungry for truth, a world where every story matters, there exists a beacon of trust and reliability. For decades, they've been our voice and our window to the world, holding the mirror of our history. With 4 TV stations and 11 radio channels spanning 27 languages, they stand as guardians of information, defenders of truth. With Mascari Heritage Advantage, they uphold every citizen's right to reliable and free information. Their archived stories shaped our past and illuminate our present. Yet now, as new challenges arise and the world evolves, their mission faces its greatest test yet. Be part of our journey and let's navigate the unknown, uncover the untold, and safeguard our future together. Tune into your public broadcaster, for it is the intersection of trust and truth. Because to UBC, your story, and every voice matters. UBC, Inspiring Uganda.
Welcome back from that quick commercial break here on Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangweso. I have an illustrious panel that we're discussing the Great Lakes region, the politics, the economics, but also the insurgencies that are there, the opportunities, the shortcomings that we need to be able to see. But also the biggest question there, what will be the impact of the elections of Uganda to this region? That is where we'll end our discussion towards the end. You can be part of the conversation on our X. We're in the spaces there. Also live on YouTube. And also if you want to send your text or WhatsApp to us, 0709 60 25 92 for you to send your message. Yusuf, let me come to you. As we wrap up these young people, I followed Kenya, especially during the 2022 elections, and even when the Gen Z uprising began there. And a young lady that had 2 children went to the street, and she was interviewed, and they asked her, really, why are you on the street? She said, if I go home, there's nothing to eat. The price of ugali has gone up. I also saw young people in the most recent Tanzanian election. Also, when you look at any uprising that has been here in Uganda protesting, young people, what are governments in the Great Lakes region missing to understand that the young people are asking for? And is it too much they're asking for?
No, they're not missing anything. Young people, you know, it's a very difficult thing to say young people. It's a very difficult category. Mm. But young people have been a threat to all governments across the world. Young people are a threat to the Israeli government right now in the US. This is why they banned TikTok. They forced a sale of TikTok so they can control the narrative. If you look at, you know, the history of revolutions is a history of young people waking up and rising. So young people are a threat to entrenched power, wherever it exists. So, and it's a generational thing that, you know, when we grow up and get into power and become older, we establish a system which works for us, right? Normally the people in power, like power is often, you know, power has lawyers and merchants often manage the state. You can say lawyers and thieves manage the state, okay? And often they put in place a system which works for them.
Why are you dragging lawyers in this?
Because they make the laws. They make the laws. They make the laws which benefit their thieves. And you know, at the end of the day, sorry, I should say this. At the end of the day, when we take account of Museveni's tyranny in Uganda, the lawyers will be there to account for themselves too, because they're part of the mess. Because they make, you know, access to legal services expensive, which benefits the tyrant. Because he knows I can abuse you, where are you going to get a lawyer? Because the lawyer is expensive. So the lawyer fraternity in this country has been core to Museveni's tyranny. You know, before we got banging the tables in Malema Bilizi, the lawyers in this country were part of the system. By just making their services inaccessible, they actually make Museveni a threat. Good today, we don't have a politician on this show, but NRM politicians love to say, go to court. Because they know, because they know, first of all, you'll struggle finding a lawyer. Because if the way they abuse poor people, they just tell them to go to court because they're a poor person, can't access a lawyer. So the tyranny thrives with the handwork of lawyers. They're part of the tyranny. So states are often run by lawyers and thieves. So they normally put in place a system which works for them. Now, over a period, young people wake up in China, in Ethiopia, in the US right now. Here, the story of revolutions here, when the Musevenis went to the bush, Museveni had to go with a mass of young people. The Kizza Besigye were young people. So across the world, young people, for easy reasons, they don't have so much to lose. Because they haven't sort of collected property. You can see the more these people collect property, I'm not one of the accumulators, the more these people accumulate, the more they have so much to lose and they fear going to the streets. Right? So young people being disenfranchised and with so little to lose, and with all this energy burning inside them, they take to the streets. So wherever they've been a threat to entrenched power. So it's not unique to Tanzania, it's not unique to us, it's the entire world. In fact, when you look at now, the first sale of TikTok speaks to that reality. But Timothy, I want to speak to a couple of things that Professor Sarah Sali raised. When she said, you know, young people, when you look to those participating in the electoral process, know what they want. You know, and I said it's the energy of a circus. I didn't want to take up most of our time, but I should have said more. that what happened to this country is that we killed all those spaces where people learn to be political subjects, right? We know there's no political education in schools anymore. When we were growing up, and I can imagine I'm not too old, there was political education in schools. We used to have a course called civics.
We did it. I did it, you didn't do it.
Museveni's government banned it. That's why I didn't do it. So Museveni wanted to ban history from universities. There was a point where the movement was banned teaching of history. Museveni has put the literature department under threat at Makerere, and Sarah Side knows this, because literature trains the humanities, the thinkers. You see the threat under which humanities are. They are paid less. They are paying technocrats, you know, carpenters who cram things and reproduce them. They're being paid much more under the STEMS arrangement. And people who think are being paid less. Just make sure humanities are low. You don't train so many. You don't train so many Dev Ngendo, so many Sarah Salis. You don't train the Sarah Evidentis, because they will try to sort of append the status quo. We had Vimeza. Museveni's government banned Vimeza. That's why people were conscientized as political subjects. There's no Vimeza. We had barazas. When I was growing up, I was too young, I never attended the baraza, but it was a big deal that people got conscientized through barazas. We had Bulungi. Where can you find Bulungi more nowadays? You know, on a Wednesday or on a Thursday, drums would be beat and people would come from their homes, go clean the well, and then meet under a tree and talk about governance and security in their places. You see, all those were the spaces in which people learned to be active political subjects. That's how they learned. That's how the best from amongst them made them aware of the way the world was working. You see, you could credit Museveni. He banned all those things. All those spaces are not there. So the energy is really exciting to see. It's really nice to see young people take part in these processes. But I can guarantee you they don't know, because they haven't been conscientized. I'm not saying they're stupid, but they have been conscientized. And you could see the difference, for example, here in Kenya. You know, Kenya was very heartwarming for me, watching Kenyans take to the streets, protest Ruto, right? They were not stopping at Ruto. They were looking behind Ruto. They would see Ruto as a puppet. They were targeting the puppet masters as well. They were targeting the World Bank and IMF. Yeah. You see, like the level of consciousness in Kenya is way above ours. You know, Timothy, I normally appear on this show and a couple of others. When you talk about our leaders being colonial caretakers, it sounds like fiction. To many people, it doesn't make sense. Someone has sort of made himself look like he's the alpha and the omega in every single decision. So when you say, no, Museveni is a worker for superior power, it looks like, what are you talking about? This man is calling all the shots. It looks like fiction. But for me, I would argue that, it's not a problem of leadership necessarily, not to dismiss that completely. But I think we need to cultivate a mass of opinion. We need to return to these spaces and cultivate a mass of opinion which understands politics differently. When you look at Burkina Faso, right now, Traore, the international media have gone to the streets of Burkina Faso trying to sample people's perceptions of their coup leader. And they say things which are beyond the former presidents. They say, we still have the CFA here, which is taking our resources. We have a colonial currency, and we bank our money in France. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that, we sell lithium and all these minerals to France, and our country is in darkness. It doesn't make sense to them. Because they've been able to cultivate a mass of opinion that really understands that we're still a colonized continent. And our leaders, they look like a problem, but really they're not a problem, right? They're just caretakers. If you look at the African continent, it's gone through phases. In the 1960s and 70s, we had people who had fought the colonial government. Then 1970, 1980, there was a surge of coups everywhere. I think we had like 27 coups in that period, because Mzungu was still tinkering with our continent. Who should we overthrow so that somebody comes in? And then we had liberation wars. Like across the continent in the 80s, there were liberation wars. And we had men come to power as liberation heroes. And they were welcomed by the international community. And after 1990, we entered the era of elections. We entered the era of democracy. Because our former colonizers had figured out that we can colonize these countries if we sell them democracy equals progress. In fact, democracy equals free markets. Democracy equals free markets, so that they open up the economy and our rich people can come back and buy everything that matters, and they take it cheaply. You see, this is what we, so when Timothy here says, if you choose democracy, stick by it, the problem is that we didn't choose it. This is the era, 1990s onwards, we enter the era, the democratic space. Everything's about going to the polls, and then you have a leader. And I can tell you, Timothy, that the Western world, which still controls us, really don't believe in democracy at all. And you don't have to look too far. You just have to go to Egypt. After the fall of Mubarak, through a very good election, which was observed by many, many international actors who said the election was very good, very well organized, Morsi emerged as the president, a member of the Islamic Brotherhood. 1 year later, they had overthrown him through a coup, and the Western world welcomed the coup leader. They don't really care about democracy as long as the leader doesn't serve their interest. Democracies across the world are threatened as long as they don't serve the interests of Western powers, right? And I think before we really cultivate a mass of opinion which respects this worldview, we are barely scratching the surface.
Thank you. David, let me come to you, and let's switch to the economics there. When you look at this Great Lakes region, we talk about DRC. I was reading about the Inga Dam that can power the whole continent. I was also reading about how if DRC decided to do agriculture in the whole country, it could feed the continent. When you look at the potential in rare earth minerals, you look at the potential in agriculture, you look at the potential in oil and gas, are these a blessing or a curse to this region?
That's a very poor way of framing there. That's a very poor way of framing really what is at stake. I mean, binaries like that, blessing or curse, are very interesting analytical tools to help us paint a black and white world. But we live in a gray, and so I will resist. I'll be very resistant to volunteer any answer. It's a very paralyzing frame thrown at me. Is it a blessing or curse? I will say let's look at this way. The question will be whether you take from the DRC, whether you go with what is beneath the soil, or whether you go with the soil, whether it goes with what is above the soil. It's a geological scandal that can fix most of our lacunas. But the assumption is that DRC is a country that belongs to the Congolese people, and DRC has been mortgaged since the Leopoldian time. This is a mortgage. We have gotten the Serojo quotas. The problem is that Congolese are Serojo quota, and the real Kasangwao are elsewhere. And that's when this whole frame of is it a blessing or curse breaks down. It doesn't make much sense. So I agree with my predecessor. I agree with Yusuf that we enter into a conversation and run halfway into it, and we pick up the terms for the debate that have been all assumed to be unproblematic. And the problem is, along the way, the conversation took another turn, and that's why let's fast with this turn. But we are fighting with this corner on the road, and we've never seen the masterpiece. The road was designed to have that turn. Only if we had cared to see from the start of the road that there will be a turn moving forward. But we are here at the turn, and we're asking ourselves, can we get back to the straight road of the line? But the entire design has made that there will be a turn there. And an engineer who has designed a turn was like, okay, now that they are struggling at this turn, let me create even a roundabout. So from the turn they put at the roundabout. Then we have now Kweto, up to Kazunzu. You get now vertigo. So as if the corner, as if now the corner is not bad enough, and then you get into. So, anyways, I think what I agree with Yusuf's analysis is that we take for granted so much of what has been given. The DRC problem is actually we get back to DRC, who are the owners of that country, and it has been assumed that when you say Congo and the Congolese people and what they have and Inga. Today, people at COP in Belém, and they are discussing, the future of this whole planet and the lungs of the planet and Amazon. And Lula made it very clear, two things in his speech, that first of all, as long as the the COP, the P in COP is not the Conference of Parties. As long as we don't bring it to be people, as long as the P is not people, then you're in circus. You're in a serious circus. And then two, even my own Amazonian forest has been chopped to 3/4. The lungs have moved to Equatorial Africa. And where is Congo in? They are in Lingala, and at least the DJ has made them into Lingala. The DJ is elsewhere. The Congolese are dancing, but who is playing the songs? They're not the Congolese who are dancing on their own tunes. So today, Congo that can salvage the planet from the so-called Paris principle. Congo that can power the entire continent from Cairo to Cape Town. Congo that can, it has got 9 neighbors here. That can accommodate the entire demographic pressure of Rwanda, the entire convoluted search for resources for Uganda, the whole of South Sudan, the whole of Congo-Brazzaville, Central Africa, Zambia, Angola. They all can literally pour in Congo in a literal physical sense and in a figurative sense. They can all pour, and still Congo will still have a belching time. They are not, it's not happening. Because there's something that's happened there. And I think I want to tie it back to the youth issue because this politics and economics is happening in this demographics container. Lumumba, whether it is Lumumba, and there's something very interesting about 1925. You know, Lumumba is born in 1925, and he comes to lead by 60. He's barely 30. Kenneth Kaunda is born in 1925. He comes to lead there at independence in 62, barely in his mid-30s. Obote was born in 1925, comes to lead there. Even the first generation of the African post-independence leaders, they resemble the people they were leading. They resemble, these were young people. They resemble, and there's something about a resemble. I have no bad faith about gerontocracy. It is Mo Ibrahim who say that, picture today the continent, you look at the entire demographic mean, and the mean is pointing you to 35. You have gotten Uganda, the second most youthful country. It's just next to Niger. And across the entire belt, whether they call Equatorial Belt and the Sahel Belt, we've gotten a population that is plus minus around 35. In this post-Cold War baby boomers, these political baby boomers of the Cold Wars, they have all gone on to resemble, people are just waiting for the graveyard. So Ibrahim Mo is like, the leaders of the continent can only take it to the graveyard, and they're leading people who are still just coming from the how do you call it, from the cradle. You know, you have people coming from the cradle, understanding the people, led by the people who are looking forward to the grave. And that asymmetry is something we really need to question. Museveni was the only oldest guy in the cabinet in 1986. Museveni was 41 or so, because he was born in about 44. So he was the only oldest guy. Muntu led this army to the longest when he was under 28. And he led it. So when you talk about this particular issue of the youth, I think, and this way Yusuf probably forgot how he started, because he ended up by saying they are a problem. I think the monolithic thing we take youth as a monolithic is also problematic. Today we have to unpack this youth. My study of Kampala, my closing in Kampala tells me that we have perhaps 3 interesting blocks when we talk about the youth. We've gotten, when I research the political geography of the town, and I map it against the demography, it's sends something very, very correlational. You have gotten one group of the youth, whom I'll call the belching youth. They are belching. Their distance to power is shorter. So they have proximity to power. They are belching because they're speaking that they want to keep the status quo. Today's people say they want to protect the gains. Those are the youth we have in the central CDB, and they all live around the 7 hills. Then we've gotten the youth who are outside of this corridor, outside of the Indian cushion. It's called now this ghetto. All the way from Katwe, you go from Katwe to down here in below that petrol station of Kobil, Bobby Wine's base. You go down there, Kuchinawataka and Kasokosoko. You've got a yawning youth. So we have the yawning youth who are very distant from power, and they can't wait to get to the table. They have been yawning. In between, on the Indian cushion, you have gotten the on-defense youth, NGO youth, and those are the people who can give us where the balance is going, because that is the powerful. They are on the fence youth. They are too decent to say, Ghetto is quite, they can't get into the trenches. They are 30, and they are extremely critical of the Belgian youth. And until and only when we tap into their own defense youth, because the future, the political future of whether we call it emancipation or further castration will depend on how the on defense youth will behave here. And that makes a whole contextual difference when we talk about Kenya or Tanzania.
Very interesting. Belching youth, yawning youth, and the ones who are closer to the Indians and the ones on the fence. Professor, let me come to you. Well, and David has made it clear, especially when we come to the economics of the region. When we look at oil, both in South Sudan or in Uganda, when we look at rare earth minerals in Uganda or in DRC, the potential and the blessing of having the young people, if we merge these two, how do we harness this for governance, but also to get our economic spring there?
Thank you very much, Timothy. First of all, I would like to correct the impression. No one is saying the youth is a problem. All we are saying is that the youth know what they want. What they want may not match with what we want. It depends on particular demographics. Of course, David has said we shouldn't look at them as monolithic. Some are rural youth, some are urban youth, and whatever. Each year, the World Bank produces a systematic country diagnostic, and it portrays the younger, and in Uganda, when you're talking about youth, actually, around 67% of the population is youth. So in talking about serving the youth, you're not really talking about serving the youth, serving the people, because they're the majority anyway. So the systematic diagnostic studies ranks them as under-skilled or unschooled, and we are now also seeing those of us who are producing them in universities saying you're producing people with no skills. So this crisis is going to continue. But even when the crisis exists, the younger people are not going to stop desiring what they want to desire. As we have observed here, they are online. Even the rural people actually are online. Many youth are online. They can get little data as long as they have a smartphone. If they don't have it, there are TV stations and vivandas in the villages that are trying to expose them. So people know what they want. And I think it's unfortunate of us to sit here and think people don't know what they want, simply because the way they are thinking and the way they are acting is different from what we think they should be thinking and acting. I think that is stripping them of agency. I think it's not right. But we should take time and understand what they are doing. We can't claim to know it all. So that is one thing. The other thing we are saying is, of course, people have talked about the crisis of leadership, but I would prefer to look at it really as a crisis of development. And there's consensus here, really, that when we hear debates of who is owning what and who is actually driving that, and people are custodians of states and the rest, it really largely comes from the fact that actually the legacy of colonialism that we see and the neoliberalism that accompanies that and the consequence that comes out of that, which is underdevelopment, is part of the crisis we are seeing here. So you have leaders who assume power thinking they are going to change things, because the previous leaders have not done well enough. The moment they assume power, you have the Glencoe problem, where people come and find a way of either co-opting them or fighting them. If that is not done directly, as happened in the Sudan, it is done through aid and through the conditionalities of aid. I think last year when we had the conference of 40 years of neoliberalism in Uganda, and what has changed. Of course, a lot has changed, and a lot has changed negatively. Because you don't look at it at simply you're at point A in 1987 and this is where you are at. What has changed for the people? So politically, of course, the neoliberalism does not only just work on the economics and the social. It works on the political, in that the individuals get empowered to question the state. But as you're doing that, you're crippling the capacity of the state to provide for the people. So you can talk about having rare earth minerals, you can talk about having all those kinds of things, but as long as there are limitations on how much you can do in terms of infrastructure development, in as much as how the conditionalities of aid and how you pay back. All it's doing is cripple these states from actually doing meaningful development. And as they are crippled from doing development and providing for the people, you have the people agitating for better because they are better exposed. So then you have the crisis you have. So it's not just a crisis of leadership. I think when we say crisis of leadership, we stop the analysis halfway. The question we should be asking ourselves is, why is there what we perceive to be a crisis of leadership? Is it that all these leaders successively assume power and fail to do or provide for their people? What else is restricting them from actually providing for their people? They all came in with grandiose ideas. But the moment they come in, World Bank moves in, IMF moves in, the lectures and lessons move in, and at the end of the day, you have that. Because at the end of the day, everyone knows Africa is the continent of the future. It does have the resources everyone wants, but no one is going to give it peace, okay? If people are not co-opted, actually they're going to be destabilized. So, as we are saying all those, it's not enough to have the minerals. Actually, whenever we have this debate outside the continent, our foreign friends are quick to say, yeah, you have them, but you cannot get to them. Because, for example, they know that although you have gold, apart from this artisanal gold mining, the real gold mining is more than 2 kilometers deep. It's more than 5 kilometers deep. Breathing stops at a normal breathing where you can put people safely down is around not even 500 meters. So to put the chutes down and put an oxygen system that keeps the men down to extract the gold, you need heavy infrastructure, which we don't have. That's why all these countries, even when they kick out some people, they still will go back to get people to come and do the infrastructure development. So until we build that capacity to do that ourselves, and that assumes that people are ready to provide and allow us to do that, then we can simply talk about having the resources. They will sit there until those who have the means actually go for them. We shall stop at the artisanal level, where you get one gold nugget, you take it to Busia from Namaingo, okay? I've been to the mines. Once you get some little nugget, you're very happy, you take it to Namaingo, you come back with 20 million. You don't work for another 6 months because you're enjoying that. And what happens as that is happening, the agriculture is dying, the soil is being opened up, the material is ending up in the water. There is also going to be another food insecurity crisis and an environmental crisis. So I think let us look at the debate holistically. It's not as simple as youth and leadership and electioneering and everything, because actually those who cripple our development are the same ones also giving us the terminologies in which we are debating these things. So you're put in a particular area, of course you're colonized, you have these whole things as legacies of colonialism, legacies of neoliberalism, which end up in a lot of underdevelopment of countries from where they should actually have been as their populations grow, and then we come and then a debate governance and a debate. It is all well orchestrated. So let us have a holistic conversation about these matters. Thank you.
Dr. Sarah, let me come to you. Earlier on, before the show began, we talked about the ocean, and Yusuf was busy provoking us to begin there.
Yusuf wants to run for the Indian Ocean constituency.
Very interesting that comes out. But let's come closer home. One, it was said it would be a quiet election. When you look at our election process as it's ongoing now, what are your concerns about it, especially on its impact on the region, vis-a-vis your comment on the whole discussion on the ocean, especially that we need the trade as a landlocked country? Us, Burundi, Rwanda, we need access to be able to have that trade going there. That conversation there, but vis-a-vis the impact of our election to the region.
Well, of course, the statements made by the president on the right of access to the ocean, which I think is a legitimate debate, because we need access to the ocean. Maybe we can disagree on the how, because he was threatening war, yet this access is obtained through diplomatic measures. But if you look at the whole essence of the East African community that is now spreading to Ethiopia, I think Ethiopia will, in 1 or 2 years, be a member of the East African community if it doesn't collapse. the essence of that economic cooperation, the essence of the Common Markets Protocol, the principles of the treaty, was to pave way for this cooperation that would give member states things like access to the ocean. So when you have President Museveni, a pioneer of the East African Community Integration Agenda, or is speaking about fast-tracking the agenda, again lamenting about challenges of accessing the ocean, it's like telling the East African citizens that this thing has failed. Because if the platform was created and this platform cannot deliver these basics, then what are we cooperating about? What is the East African Community Integration Agenda about? What is the debate? We are talking about ratification of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Why should we be lamenting about access to the ocean? Why can't leaders fast-track these basics? And if they can't, then how will you have this tenfold economic progress? Because the leaders must pave way for movement, must create infrastructure that makes this movement possible. And once they cannot put these basics in place, then there is no investment to talk about in terms of big time investment. I wanted to bring in the example of Ethiopia as Professor Sali was concluding on the obstacles, how we must rely on other people. When Emperor Haile Selassie wanted to build the Renaissance Dam, he was denied IMF loan so many years ago. And he did make a comment that has been now printed on the dam, that one day the Ethiopian people will collect money and build their Renaissance Dam. And indeed they have, without any single loan. 100% funded by the Ethiopian people. So when I talk about the significance of leadership, Professor, my namesake, that's what I'm talking about. When you look at the lighting in Addis, after the completion of that dam, every home has electricity, every street is lit. There was a time Addis was divided by wetlands. You pass through a town, wetland. It's no more. Addis is now planning the biggest airport in Africa, competing with the giants in the Middle East. No loans. So why can't African leaders go and benchmark from what's happening in Ethiopia? Why can't they? If the biggest dam in Africa can be built with no single loan, then what is it that we are talking about? What are the actual obstacles of development in Africa? It remains leadership. Leadership is the center of the crisis of underdevelopment in Africa, and there is no way about it.
Interesting. No, let me come to Timothy. Timothy, when you, especially what I asked Dr. Sarah, when you look at our elections and you look at the ocean and what she has mentioned, giving examples of the Renaissance Dam, the Grand Renaissance Dam, David talked about the Inga Dam, how it could power. Why are we failing to harness this, but also the impact of our elections to the region?
So first, the ocean and Uganda. I think that most of this, Uganda being part of the global, but also the protocols that are already established, the territorial principles, the territorial frameworks are clear.
Actually, just to add to that, the president was clear and said, with the changing presidents in Kenya, the agreement is not really catching. He almost sounded like he was, protesting.
Yeah, I think that the president comes from a point of view that there are things that he's not happy about, but the idea that he owns and Uganda owns the ocean is a non-starter. And we have principles, we have territorial frameworks that govern that. Why is President Museveni not calling for interest in Nigeria, in Tanzania, in Ethiopia? Why is he interested in Kenya? I think that there are fundamental issues beyond just the question of the ocean that is at play. largely economics, because when you try to understand the dynamics upon which the president is premising to even make a very strong case for which it would belong to Uganda, and my assumption that when he says it is my ocean, it's the country's, position that Uganda has a, shares in that direction. But definitely there could be legitimate concerns on how does Uganda, either through Kenya, through Tanzania, or whichever country, can be enabled to have access to that. But the arguments of ownership, the arguments around entitlement to some of these natural resources greatly undermines the broader perspective of the diplomatic engagements of countries on how they trade, on how they utilize resources, but also, more importantly, on how the regional frameworks operate. Of course, it's a clear testament that the would-be regional body, the EAC, would be a framework to which some of these issues are addressed. The region is now in slumber. Every country seems to be addressing its internal issues, and which blinds to view what the regional blocks or the other opportunities that come along that. In terms of what the Uganda's elections look like for both the region, the opportunities, it is true that Uganda remains to be a great ally in the region, both economically and in other areas, looking at the resources, but also looking at the long-term relations that we've had with our neighbors, both on the side that we seem to own an ocean, and those that, like Congo. So for me, I think that on how the question of...
Congo has access to the sea.
The Atlantic.
It's not landlocked.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but beyond that, I think the point really is around how do we ensure that the electoral process, like that of Uganda, it's clear that whatever happens in Uganda may have a ripple effect on how we relate with our country. Whatever is happening in DR Congo, whatever is happening in Tanzania, in one way or another, is affecting Uganda directly, but also from the perspective of the regional integration. And so, on how we can harness some of these opportunities, I think that Uganda must adhere to the, to the democratic and basic principles, to which it is actually seem to be pushing for: the respect of human rights, the respect of rule of law, but also, more importantly, ensuring that the people are part and parcel of how the country is governed. Yusuf seemed to be suggesting for us to rethink the question of democracy, but from my assessment is that democracy remains to be the most tested and the most viable means of a governance of system. We can have a discussion on that, at least in terms of sustainability, in terms of a system that has been tested. Democracy is one of those, at least in our discussion.
Why don't we find our own way of governance?
I mean,
if this has done the test of time and still proven not to work, and Dr. Sarah spoke about the kingdoms then that had separation of powers, why not find our own to be able to govern us? Because Yusuf said this was brought to us, we really didn't ask for it. Why don't we find our own that can manage us?
Democracy does not operate in abstract. That it's a count from 1 to 10. Countries can find
12.
Maybe 12.
No, I'm saying we're 12. We've left the 10.
Absolutely. But you see, the point is that countries can, there are basic principles to which society agrees to govern themselves. And if you look at the tenets that democracy exposes, you clearly see that if you have leaders that have clear perspective of what their countries looks like, but also recognizing that the people know what they want, the people have agency to which they can decide how the country should be governed. If those principles are respected, the question of how the country is governed, of course, again, is premised around the leadership. But more importantly is...
One of the biggest lies of our time is power belongs to the people. And we keep repeating it, like it's, I think about democracy, that even the Americans in the 1700s were worried that this thing is easy to corrupt. It's easy, it's buyable. The stock jobbers, you know, the men with money, they could quickly buy a leadership, do whatever they want. And if you look at America's lobby group, it's like sanctioned corruption. That's what they're doing. And I also have said American leaderships are people without power. They're like public relations officers. You know, all they do is they could talk a good game like Barack Obama, but the system remains operational. And they have a bad public relations person, such as Donald Trump. He says it as it is, you know, but the system keeps rolling, right? But as you said, we could have a conversation on this. I just wanted to return to, there's a beautiful point that, you know, Sarah made about the quality of leadership. And something small that she didn't say, which I want to add, is that one of the most gratifying things for me going through Bola International Airport is buying coffee from that airport and looking at the receipt. And it shows you clearly this coffee was sold to you by the Oromia Cooperative Union. You know, it brightens up my soul, because I know we had cooperatives in Uganda which should be selling coffee at Entebbe International Airport. One of the biggest things that Ethiopia exports is coffee. 80% of their coffee is exported by cooperatives, native-owned cooperative unions belonging to the Ethiopians. Ours will be competing with Ethiopia. 70% is 70%, the 10 biggest exporters of our coffee are all foreign. Which means when we make so much money and register on the books, that money doesn't really come back. So there's no money in this economy because most of the things from which money is made are not locally owned. The genius of Prime Minister Meles, you know, Meles Zenawi, was his decision not to open up the economy to foreign capitalists who just milk it without feeding it. Meles Zenawi, till his death, he argued that we need to help our people grow. At one point, even Meles argued, if I allow a bank such as Barclays to come and operate in Ethiopia, they have money more than my country. They operate technologies that I don't have anybody to regulate them. Who knows how they operate? So he said, I can't open up when I don't even have the capacity to regulate what you're going to be doing. You see, so Meles said, let's allow our people to grow. And to the point that by the time we open up, there's competition which is local, right? As Ramadan Ngobi used to say, for Uganda, we just removed the door and threw it away. Everybody came in. And there were no rich people. Like most of the things which made meaning to us, they were just left in ruins. You see, Ethiopia has a train system now. Ours is rotten. You see, one of the most embarrassing pictures was seeing EU diplomats who killed Uganda Railway Corporation taking pictures in this defunct thing, you know, running to Wege and coming back. You see, like people, you know, I argued when I was here on the show discussing our tycoon, who's like a government tycoon, he's got a GovCoon, Hamis Chigundu. Our rich people are brawling with poor people over markets and slaughterhouses instead of investing in things with this big money. I would imagine if, say, Hamis Chigundu was really rich, if he invested in a rail system, he'll be drowning in money because we have a forgotten public service system. If there was a capitalist who is interested in making sure there's a public transport system in this country, light rails, heavy rails, you know, the trucks are still actually, you know, visible, he would invest in that. And if you have the connections that Hamis Chigundu has, if you have money, they should give you Ugandan areas. Run it and make money out of it. Right? But they're fighting with small people, equally poor people. This is the thing that Meles didn't want. Meles wanted that the big things that locals might fear or might be outcompeted, let them gamble with it. You see, for example, we opened our EEB to Umeme. Umeme milked this thing for donkey years. Meles said, no, let there be a local company to try and gamble with electricity provision. Let it be government. Till his death, you know, one of the stories I read recently, I think in 2021, was that Ethiopia finally opened its coffee industry to foreigners. My heart sank. I'm like, why are they opening? Because they're going to be milked dry.
Yeah.
So when Sarah talks about quality of leadership, it's the leadership which understands the ways in which you can keep money. Because we are broke as a country, we are dying on loans because all the money that could stay here goes outside. You know, Timothy, I've said to you before that a telecom company such as Airtel, you know, our UTL is rotten. You don't have UTL, you don't have UTL, you don't have UTL. I used to have UTL. I'm not sure anybody has UTL here. Our UTL is rotten. But every morning before you wake up, Timothy, Airtel, which has the smallest share of the market compared to MTN, has made like 7 billion Uganda shillings. Every morning before you wake up.
Yeah.
From selling its cheapest product.
Night bundles.
Like from selling its cheapest products, maybe 500 or 1,000. They've made 7 billion. It's a foreign company. MTN does the same. Oh. You know, then we can't count. So we are broke as a country and as a people. Not because we are not hardworking. Someone has, you know, laughed at us for being lazy. We're not lazy, but because the money just leaves. It's just leaving. Because as Govi said, this is the PS of finance, so that there's no doubt. He said, Stephen blacked out the door, threw it away, and everybody came to steal Uganda's resources.
David, these African countries, how do we galvanize them to be able to harness what they have, the opportunities that are there, so that there's a prosperous population within this continent?
There have been a time when this happened and it worked. Look, the oldest regional economic integration in this region, as far as my history books are concerned, it's this very small, not talked about in this Anglophone East Africa. It's called the CEPGL, the economic community of the Great Lakes region, Francophone Great Lakes, made of Burundi, Rwanda, and Zaire and Congo then. So it is 1966, October 1966. It is an economic reg. Forget about the East African thing, which is the British East Africa writ large, which is really IBEC writ large. I'm talking about leaders. One Michovero, Michael Michovero, Joseph Mobutu, and you have, by then it was still living, Abiyarimana has not been taken over, it was still Kayibanda. And they're asking themselves, man, we were this Belgian as the Rwanda-Urundi-Congo unit. And now we have, one thing we have is political independence. And they all agree, we don't have economic independence, we don't have cultural independence, we don't have historical independence. I mean, someone in Belgium can write a very brilliant thesis about this place without having set foot here because all the archives are there. We don't even have intellectual independence, our morality is under question, we don't have the moral decency, we don't have moral independence. So they said, what do we do with this one thing in our closet, in our wardrobe? What do we do with political independence? And they quickly figured out that, hey, this whole Nkrumah thing of, you know, seek ye first the political kingdom and the rest will be given unto you is the biggest mirage. The rest is not given unto you. The rest is a field of struggle. There's nothing like the rest. When you have, it's supposed to be, you start with that rest. The rest which we expected to be given unto you is what is the product of this of the fight, of the struggle. So I mean, I read CEPGL's book the whole of last year, and there are three fascinating things that happened there. So one is an understanding that you know, this cooperation, you know, with Congo having its all access up to the Atlantic Ocean, Burundi and Rwanda having all these two lakes with them, and then there is this other border that is actually gives us two regimes of violence, you know. The border gives us the regime of visa and the regime of surveillance, and they have to change the meaning of the border. So from border as a bridge, from border as a barrier to border as a bridge. When you reach the border, what is the predisposition you have? And say, when you reach the border, you should look at having reached the bridge. Border as a connector, not border as a separator. And these are African brains. And you know, how many people think of border as a bridge in this current dispensation? Border is a barrier where Uganda starts, you know, we even have a Busia, Uganda, and then there's Busia, Kenya. And you'll see the difference. All Busia, all Malabas, but you'll see. So they did that one thing, from border as a barrier to border as a bridge. A fantastic idea. This is what the Saheli people looked at when they faced with the Sahara. They looked at the Sahara as a bridge, it was a barrier that separated from what the American political scientists have called Maghreb, North Africa, which is part of NEMA, putting the whole part of Africa into the Middle East and North Africa, and then cutting Mauritania, Senegal, and what have you into Africa proper, to use the Ego's term, Black Africa. That particular concept of what the meaning of a border for us. We have history for where we can recoup from. Two, it's not just, I mean, leadership is very key, and I very much agree with one Sarah on the extreme here and to another Sarah on the other extreme here. There is definitely leadership deficiency here. But from where do we stand to start thinking alternative is also another question. Because that's the other thing which we need to bring in the equation. For me, the problem is the problem is dual. I mean, there is the will to power and there's the will to see change. But from which vantage point, you see, when we are a people now that has been in better scenarios robbed of history, and what scenario pushed against all thinking of alternatives exist. You know, when you hear Timothy saying that, you know, democracy has been tested, I mean, this particular democracy, the liberal democracy has been tested, and it has seemed to be attractive. I mean, this is a very beautiful parroting of Winston Churchill. You know, democracies may not be good, but alternatives to it are worse. And Churchill said it at a particular historical conjuncture when he wanted to sell a particular product. So where do we stand to start thinking alternatives? It's not just to say that the pre-colonial was better. How much of the pre-colonial do you understand? It's not any better. It's delivered us to the colonial times. If the pre-colonial gave us the colonial times, there is some point in what Museveni's critiques launches about the pre-colonial leaders. So we have a serious homework, which is epistemic. So besides the moral decency, there's a very serious epistemic challenge of our times. And I don't know whether TikTok and Google and the connection to the internet is going to get us to an epistemic breakthrough, but there is a vacancy of imagination.
Thank you. Lastly, Professor, let me come to you. And Yusuf hinted on it, especially on refugees and them coming in. As a social scientist, when you look at this number that was 1.3 grown to 1.4, now at 1.5, and the number is still growing, what does this refugee status or question speak to?
Of course, having so many refugees means there's also a lot of instability because there's a reason they are coming. And of course, it depends on which kind of refugees we are talking about. There are refugees arising from conflict situations, but now of recent we've come to learn of concepts such as climate refugees or climate-induced refugees, in that people live in conditions where the situation becomes so hard for them to survive because of climate change, or because where they were is no longer productive and they have to move on. But I want to assume that Yusuf was really talking about the refugees that are coming out of political crisis. And the whole reason that Uganda is prized, and there are a lot of books that have been written about as the country with which takes the highest number of refugees, but also the country where refugees have the best kind of experience, especially urban refugees, because I understand other refugees are contained and are given rules, but for us, because we have nothing to offer, refugees are free. If you want to get out of a camp and make a living in the city, so be it. So we have refugees in all our saloons, we have refugees in our tailoring shops, and you have refugees everywhere. So if they want to be, but of course we do, the ones I've observed, they come and then they go. But what was Yusuf saying? Yusuf's point was really that these people curate leaders that they want to pander to their whims. And as long as you do that, you'll be settled with them. And he was building his narrative of to who, not these exact words, but what I can paraphrase as, was actually questioning to who the leaders are accountable to. And how, as long as the leaders are doing what the neo-colonialists want, those leaders will be praised, they will be celebrated, they will be welcomed, they will be all those kinds of things. And that part also serves what I said earlier, that there is a crisis of leadership, but ending the discussion there is half the story, okay? Because there's a reason why we have a crisis in leadership. And it's because globally it has been skewed like that. Africa is an outpost for natural resource extraction. That's why we have slavery, and when it becomes very expensive to take them, enslave them from where they are, not much infrastructure development. It's not seen as a place where you can actually seek ideas. It is only a place where you can apply or test the ideas that you have, and you have these cycles. And even when we have grown to have, and I'm building this really comparing the different, I am in the academia, and when you encounter the academia, like recently I came from China, it's really a different kind of crop of academics, okay? For us, we are valued very much in how much we reason and think very much like the Western kind of scholarship that we have inherited. Even when we scream decolonization, we are really screaming decolonization within that very context. These guys just closed in. They did not just close the economy, they closed everything around them, built what they have and opened after they have established what they have. So it validates what people have said about Ethiopia and everything. And also we want to, it's important to note that Ethiopia just doesn't build a dam and is happy building a dam. There's a lot of resistance. Some of the wars we have seen around in Ethiopia have been actually related to that dam, or we actually told. Of course, then when they lose access to the sea with the independence, is it of Eritrea? And of course, now they're also struggling to get away to the sea, and for them it has been clear they will get that, even if it's just a 2-kilometer wide strip, they are going to fight to have it, which is not what the Ugandan president said. He was not really threatening war. I think he was just making a case that we can have access to the Indian Ocean. But the Ethiopians are very clear. Why? Because even when they were building the dam, when you talk to Ethiopians in Addis, they tell stories of they celebrated Bangladesh. They celebrated Bangladesh. Any attempt to raise a question and give a different narrative, you're told you're just politically disgruntled. So there are all these kinds of things. And access to the sea is not just about access to the sea. It's about the economic implications that actually means. We had here recently a debate on UNOC and why Uganda was actually building UNOC and wanting to have bases in Mombasa. Because of the cost of oil that increases by those middlemen who control the transition of oil when it reaches there. So if you have access to the sea, it has very serious economic implications. It's not, and that's why the diplomatic things and whatever else it takes needs to come in. But as we say this, of course, we have to know the context in which we work. So I still stand by the fact that we, of course, have a young population which we have to plan for. They are disgruntled because we have not planned for them very well. But my view is that the problem is not just leadership, but it is also the context in which that leadership is formed. You have a leadership which is an outcrop of a post-colonial system, and with views of people as a governed people, that leadership brings in certain things. But then those who fund them also want them to factor in like that. So it's a whole political economy of things which we need to pay attention to. In 2015, I think I was with Yusuf in Addis Ababa, and we visited the African Union, and I hope you remember what views were given about you then at the PhD, as a group of PhD students. I mean, the AU sitting leadership at the time was really not happy with this very clever African PhD student, because the guy just saw them as people who are getting PhDs to go and toy back in the country and cause him mayhem. And then, of course, what was important in that meeting is the younger people were asking about the African free pass, okay? and whatever. And this guy was clear, except if you're Dangote. What do you want a free visa pass for? Because you have nothing to offer. And in as much as we were angry and the PhD students took him on, the issue remains that until we build our economies, and that's why I'm talking about the crisis of development, until we build our economies and we are able to trade with each other, even if we have bodies like the SCFTC and the rest, we shall not have much trade. We are still all wired to sending things out to the metropolitan.
Thank you very much. Let me read some feedback that has come through. Someone sends a message and says, thank you for the show. I really like the unfees that Dr. Sarah said that Yusuf wants to run for the Indian Ocean position. It was a cool one there. Richard, you have very good jokes there. Someone goes on to say, I'm glad that Dr. David is there on the panel. Today's panel is discussing issues that are at the core of survival, especially with close proximity to DRC. This is also David, and he says, I'm watching from Turkey. Thank you, David. Good evening, Timothy. All protocols observed. I really wanted to commend your choice of panelists today. Quality of debate and then intellectual engagement. I must say, the fact that people like Dr. Sarah owe their allegiance to protecting the gains and notwithstanding. Andrew from Kisoro, very interesting comment there.
No, one is a professor, the other one is a doctor.
Ashraf from Makere, Chikoni. I send my greetings to all of you there. I appreciate what you are discussing, especially democracy in Africa. Often acts like sugarcoating on the surface, but deep is suffering. We celebrate democracy rituals, yet the country like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, without Western-style democracy, are advancing at extraordinary speeds. Meanwhile, Uganda, which was once given loans to some Arab countries in the 70s, still battles persistent poverty. I believe Africa does not necessarily need democracy to grow, but rather governance systems that are disciplined, efficient, and focused on development. Lastly, please, Timothy, let the discussion have an element that we can all still benefit from. How on earth do you compare Emirates, Qatar, and Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia, which are globally recognized as developed countries, while Uganda is a third world country? Tobias Kamgisha in Eswati. Okay, thank you, Tobias. Yes, we'll leave it at that. If there's anything else. Julius says, leadership, leadership, leadership. You can't elect dead-headed people. You expect good governance and development. Look at the cream of the ideas on the panel. No one is offering leadership at the helm. Okay, Professor, I think we need to offer leadership at the helm.
We shall front Yusuf.
Eh? We shall front
Building the
Professor Sarah Sadiq.
I think the person was talking about the presidency.
And the presidency.
The deputy president of a university.
Deputy president of the university. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming through and having such a patent discussion. We really appreciate the technical team that has made today possible. For you who has been watching or sending us messages, thank you very much for being part of the show. For today, we'll leave it at this. Good morning.
UBC, inspiring Uganda.
Hello Uganda, I am Wes Isaac, NRM Chairman, Radio Uganda Village. I thank all of you who attended